The storm raged strongly all that night, but nothing of particular note occurred. The next morning, however, when they came to breakfast, they found the terrible stain of blood once again on the floor. I don't think it can be the fault of a paragon detergent, said Washington. For I have tried it with everything, it must be the ghost. He accordingly rubbed out the stain a second time, but he second time. But the second morning it appeared again. Third morning also it was there. Though the library had been locked up at night by Mr. Otis himself. The key carried upstairs. The whole family were not quite interested. Mr. Otis began to suspect that he had been too certain that your beliefs are right and others should accept them in the denial of the existence of ghosts. Mrs. Otis expressed her intention of joining the Psychological Society, and Washington prepared a long letter to Maris Meyer and Podmore on the subject of the pre on the on the preeminence of blood red stains when connected with crime. That night, all doubts about the objective existence of phantomata, phantomist meta were removed forever. The day had been warm and sunny, and in the cool of the evening, the whole family went out to drive. They did not return home till 9 o'clock. When they had a light supper, the conversation in no way turned upon caste. So there were not even those primary conditions of accepting new ideas, expectations, which so often came before the presentation of psychological process. The subject discussed, as I have since learned from Mr. Otis, were merely such as form the ordinary conversation of cultured Americans of the better class, such as the immense superiority of Miss Fanny Dupont over Sarah Bennett as an actress, the difficulty of obtaining green corn buckwheat cakes and odds, even in the best English houses, the importance of Boston in the development of the world soul, the advantage of the baggage check system in railway travellings, and the sweetness of the New York accent as compared to the London talking slowly. No mention at all was made of the supernatural, nor was Sir Simon de Canterville mentioning indirectly to in any way. At 11 o'clock, the family retired, and by half past, all the lights were out. Some time after, Mr. Otis was awakened by a curious noise in the corridor outside his room. It sounded like the clear like the sound it sounded like the sound of metal and seemed to be coming near every moment. He got up at once and struck a match and looked at the time. It was exactly 1 o'clock. He was quite calm and felt his pulse, which was not at all feverish. The strange noise still continued, and with it he heard clearly the sound of footsteps. He and with it he heard clearly sound of footsteps. He put his slippers, took a small rectangular glass container out of his dressing case and opened the door. Right in front of him he saw in the pale moonlight an old man of terrible aspect. His eyes were as red burning coals. Long grey hairs fell over his shoulder in thick circles. His garments, which were of old fashioned cut, were dirty and torn, and from his wrist and ankles hung heavy chains and rusty shackles. My dear sir, said Mr. Otis, I really must insist on your oiling those chains, and have brought you for the purpose. A small bottle of the Rising Sun lubricant, which means substance to make machines work smoothly. It is said to be completely effective upon one application, and there are several proofs to that effect on the wrapper from some of our most famous native divines. I shall leave it here for you by the bedroom candles and will be happy to supply you with more should you require it. With these words, the United States minister let down the bottle down on the marble table and closing the door retired to rest. For a moment, the Canterville ghost stood quite motionless in natural anger, then dashing the bottle violently upon the polished floor. He fell down the corridor, uttering hollow cries and giving a horrible green light. Just, however, as he reached the top of the great oak staircase, a door was flung open. Two little white robed figures appeared, and a large pillow whizzed past his head. There was evidently no time to be lost, so hastily adopting the fourth dimension of space, which means extraordinary speed, as a means of escape, he vanished through the wainscoting, which means wooden paneling, and the house became quite quiet. On reaching a small secret chamber in the left wing, he leaned up against a moonbeam to recover his breath and began to try and realize his position. Never in a brilliant and uninterrupted career of 300 years had he been so grossly, which means greatly, insulted. He thought of the Dowager Duchess, whom he had frightened into a fit as she stood before the glass in her lace and diamonds, of the four housemaids who had gone into hysterics, which means lost control of emotions, when he merely, which means only, Greenwald laughed at them through the curtains on one of the spare bedrooms of the rector of the parish, whose candle he had blown out as he coming late one night from the library, and who had been under the care of Sir William Gull ever since. A perfect martyr to nervous disorders, and of old maiden of Tremolick, who having wakened up one morning early and seen a skeleton seated in the armchair by the fire reading her diary, had been confirmed to her bed for 6 weeks with an attack of brain fever, and on recovery had become reconciled to the church, which means become religious, and broken of her connection with the notorious, which means all framed, spective, which means who doubts truth, Monisired the voluntary. He remembered the terrible night when the wicked Lord Canterville was found choking in his dressing room with the knave of diamond, which means type of playing halfway down his throat, and the confession just before he died that he had cheated Charles James Fox of $50,000 at Crockford by means of that very card, and the swore that the ghost had made him swallow, which means gulp down very card. Sorry, ghost had made him gulp down it. All his great achievements came again for back to him again from the butler who had slot himself in a pantry because he had seen a green hand tapping at the window pane, to the beautiful Lady Stulfield, who was always obliged to wear a black velvet band round her throat to hide the mark of 5 fingers burnt upon her white skin, and who drowned herself at the last in the carp pond at the end of the King Walk, with the enthusiastic, egoistic, which means self-pride ego, of the truth artist. He went over his most celebrated performance and smiled bitterly to himself as he recalled to mind his last appearance as Red Ribbon of the Strange Way. His debut at Gaunt Gibbet, the bloodsucker of Blackrimore, and the Furium, which means commotion, he had excited one lovely June evening by merely playing nine pins with his own bones upon the lawn tennis ground. And after all this, some rich modern Americans were to come and offer him the rising sun lubricants and thrown pillows at his head. It was quite unbearable besides. No ghost in history had been ever treated in this manner. Accordingly, he determined to have vengeance, which means revenge. Accordingly, he determined to have revenge and remained till day night in an attitude of deep thought.